How can an advanced capitalist country like Canada have a socialist revolution? I fear we'd be overthrown by the U.S. so easily. Well, I'm not here to tell you what to do about that. I will say this, that people, when they talk about revolutions, that people generally believe that revolutions are acts of violence. People generally believe that revolutions are people going out in the streets and waving guns around and doing crazy things, and that's not the case. Every revolution in history, again, I'm going to say what's not obvious, but what is true. Every revolution in history has been an act of self-defense. Self-defense, right? It hasn't been an adventurous act of people running around crazy. It hasn't been people, singing "Do We Hear the People Sing" and building barricades, and that's not what revolutions are. Revolutions are acts of self-defense. When people are up against a wall and being killed and have nowhere to turn, they defend themselves by having revolutions. Revolutions are acts of self-defense. You look at the Chinese Revolution, for example, right? In China, the communists made an alliance with the KMT Nationalist Party, which was a progressive anti-imperialist party founded by Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And the communists worked within it to try and build up China and make China a better country and to defend the rights of workers. And they were an axis or a section within the KMT Nationalist Party, working peacefully to try and build progressive democratic reforms. And then, after the death of Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek took power. And Chiang Kai-shek, was aligned with the United States and Britain, and he proceeded to start killing the communists. So the communists fled into the countryside, and they carved out liberated territories and redistributed land. And then Japan invaded China. And so the communists they had the Eighth Route Army, and they led an upsurge, a resistance to Japan, the war of people's resistance to Japanese aggression. The communists were on the battlefields fighting against the Japanese invaders. And then, after Japan was defeated, the communists tried to form a coalition government with the nationalist KMT. The nationalist KMT wouldn't have it, again started killing communists, and so communists again defended themselves and ultimately established the People's Republic of China. The Chinese Revolution was not adventurism, it wasn't people acting crazy, it was self-defense, right? The Russian Revolution, again, there was an uprising against the Tsar that was supported by some of the most rich and powerful people because the Tsar was losing World War I and the war was not going well. The Tsar was brought down, and then there was a section of society, people didn't want to continue the war. And Kornilov, a military general, was trying to seize power and become like the dictator to continue aggressively fighting in World War I. And the forces in Russia that were opposing World War I would have been basically exterminated if you were against the war. And so, the Soviets and the workers and all these people that didn't want to continue the war, these workers' councils that had been formed, defended themselves from the Kornilov reaction, from General Kornilov becoming the military dictator and continuing World War I, and they established the Soviet Union. You can go down the line. Revolutions are always acts of self-defense. They're not adventurous acts of violence. They are acts of self-defense. When people have no choice, when people are threatened, when their basic democratic rights are being threatened, when people are up against a wall, and just the iron heel, as Jack London, the famous American socialist novelist who also wrote Call of the Wild, the iron heel that he wrote about in his science fiction socialist novel, when the boot of capitalism is coming down onto people's necks, when they don't have the ability to struggle peacefully, and they don't have the ability to vote and try and implement progressive reforms, when everything is being taken away from them, when their lives are in danger, people defend themselves. They defend themselves, and that's what socialist revolutions are. And the kind of people that advocate violence, and the kind of people that go around, advocating and doing crazy things, genuine socialists and Marxists have always opposed that. Read Lenin, what he wrote about it. Read, there's a lot written about quote-unquote terrorism, quote-unquote left adventurism, punchism, Blanquism. Marxists, genuine Marxists, always oppose that. They always do. And the forces that engage in that kind of activity are ultra-leftists. And it's a middle-class deviation. People that want to have an adventure and want to feel like they're heroes. People that think that they're going to create, they're going to make people rise up by engaging in some kind of heroic act of violence. They're going to do something really spectacular, and people are going to see it and go, "Oh no, now's the time." That's a complete illusion. And actually, Lenin's older brother, did that. He tried to kill Tsar Alexander III and was hanged for it. And that kind of thinking, I mean, there have always been that kind of deviation has existed in left-wing circles. But genuine Marxists, Marx himself, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Fidel Castro, all of them have always opposed that kind of activity. That ultra-left adventurism is not Marxism. It's a deviation, and it's not rooted in actually trying to win. It's rooted in kind of a middle-class desire to prove that you're heroic, to fulfill some kind of action fantasy, to think of yourself as a hero. And ultra-leftist deviations tend to be rooted in that desire. When people are not thinking scientifically, when they're trying to serve some kind of psychological need on their own part and not actually advance the class forces, that's what that is. And ultra-leftism, adventurism, terrorism, that's all a deviation from genuine Marxists. Genuine Marxists favor peaceful, progressive reforms. They favor moving in a peaceful, democratic way towards socialism. Unfortunately, the capitalists of the world tend to respond to people doing that in a peaceful way by being violent and oppressive. I mean, Abraham Lincoln, he came into office, he didn't even want to abolish slavery. And the capitalists were violent. And they violently tried to drive the federal government out so they could maintain their slave system. Hugo Chavez, elected on a platform, he didn't even favor socialism. He said he was for the third way between both capitalism and socialism. And they tried to remove him with a violent coup. And that the capitalists, the violence in revolutions always starts with the capitalists. The capitalists, they can't stand the people peacefully struggling. They can't stand the people demanding their rights, and they become violent. And the people are given the choice of kill or be killed, and they defend themselves. Revolutions are acts of self-defense. That's all they are. But there you go. Doesn't that mean we should ignore the fact that revolutions have always happened violently? Well, that's what I'm telling you. I mean, they are violent, but the violence is caused by the capitalists and by the old order violently suppressing people and giving them no choice but to kill or be killed. And folks, I really, really, really hope nothing like that ever happens in the United States, right? Situations like that are not pretty. It might seem like an action movie, it might seem really exciting, but if you talk to people who actually lived through violent revolutions, they are awful, awful traumatic experiences. They are not good situations. It's a nightmare. And in order for things to get bad enough that people have no choice but to engage in a violent revolution, things have to be really, really, really bad. And I don't want things to get that bad. I would like the USA to move forward in a progressive, peaceful, democratic way. I would like it if people in the United States were to awaken and gradually, start moving the country in a socialist direction and be sensible. And I would, anyone who says they want a violent revolution is not a healthy person. Maybe they just need to grow up, maybe they're just immature, or maybe not. But if you go around saying, I want a violent revolution, you're a lunatic. Well, you're not a lunatic. Maybe you just don't understand the way the world works. But genuine Marxists, scientific Marxists, people that actually want to make a better world, do not favor a violent revolution, are not trying to create a violent revolution. And people that are, and people that romanticize violent revolutions, maybe they're just out of touch with reality. Maybe they're trying to fulfill some psychological desire they have to be a hero. I don't know what it is, but it's not Marxism. Marxism favors a peaceful transition toward a socialist society. Unfortunately, Marxists also understand that capitalists are so violent in trying to preserve their power that unfortunately people are forced in some situations, like in Russia in 1917, like in China in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, that people are forced to defend themselves when they have no other choice, when their rights are being taken away, when they're being killed. People have the right to not be killed. That's different. That's very, very different. But anyway, that's the point I wanted to make, and that I don't go around advocating a violent revolution. I really don't want a violent revolution. I think a violent revolution would be an absolute nightmare, because it is. If you look at what happens in violent revolutions, not good at all. Not good at all. And if you want to call me a revisionist and say I'm oh, he's a sellout and a phony, well, you can go ahead and do that. But I'm just telling you the absolute truth here. That if you know anyone who's been through a violent revolution, and I'm talking about people that support the ultimate outcome, that say, look, this revolution was a good thing, even those people don't want to relive the revolutions. That revolutions are desperate acts by people in order to preserve their lives. Violent revolutions I'm talking about are desperate acts by people to preserve their lives when the system makes life unlivable. That's the reality of violent revolutions. So anyone who goes around telling you they want a violent revolution, you need to tell them to go read some actual scientific socialism. Turn down the Les Miserables soundtrack. And actually study history, because that's not how things work.